In this video, I'm going to be showing a pretty substantial part of my painting process using oil paint on a piece of primed printmaking paper. This paper was sized and then oil primed probably like 2 years ago, and it's been sitting in a flat file waiting to be painted on. At the beginning of this video, you saw sort of this ghost image, this really rough, thin block-in of my painting, which is referencing a still from the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is part of a scene with one of the main characters where they're sort of fragmented and fractured into this layered sort of three-version portrait. And what I really like about this reference is the range in contrasts of multiple things. So that includes proportions of shapes. I think it has a really dynamic composition with a lot of variety in the shapes. And then there's a lot of contrast in the temperature of the colors within this image as well. So we have kind of a warmer side and a cooler side to each left and right side of the reference, which was a lot of fun to try to unify in terms of the palette. So the palette that I'm using for this painting is sort of a split primary palette. So if we look at my palette on the right side of the video right now, on the very left side next to the white is Oleo Gel, which is a gel solvent-free medium made by Rublev Colors. It's a gel medium that I use pretty much for all of my paintings. And then, we've moved on in the video, but if you go back, you can see I have titanium white, and then in order, it goes cadmium yellow light, cadmium yellow medium, ultramarine blue, quinacridone magenta, burnt sienna, phthalo blue, and cadmium red light. So those are the colors that I used to create this painting. There are other small piles of muted, middle kind of neutrals that were leftover piles of paint from other paintings, or were like leftover mixed palette scraps from sessions with this painting. So what we're seeing at this point in the video is still part of the second session on this painting. So in this phase of the painting, I'm working on top of a, like I said, kind of a ghostly, really simplified version of the image where I was focusing more on big shapes and trying to find the proportions of the painting using a very thin layer of oil paint that either had a small amount of Gamsol solvent or just was the paint right out of the tube. I tried not to use a lot of gel medium in the first session because I wanted that layer to dry as fast as possible. I don't have video of that part of the process because it was a live demonstration that I did during one of my online painting courses that I'm teaching through a university this semester. But I've been working on the painting now outside of class, and that has allowed me to record my process in these time-lapse videos. So this video is really intended for my painting students online, but I think it's good information to share with anyone who's interested in painting with a indirect approach where we're building a painting in multiple layers of oil color. So this is still in that second session of my process, and at this point now I'm starting to really try to get a better handle on the local color of each of the shapes. And by that I mean when I'm looking at my iPad, which has my reference image pulled up, I'm really trying to match the inherent local color properties of most of the medium-sized shapes now. So I'm looking for color properties of hue. So if something looks pretty orange or blue, I'm trying to find the right kind of blue, while also looking at the level of chroma. So if something looks more neutral or more saturated, that's helping me kind of place those medium to small shapes now at this point in the process. And then value is still very important to really try to get the right sense of contrast and luminosity that a transparent illusion like this is going to convey. So as this video is progressing, really pay attention to relationships of values in the portraits, the three sort of stacked portraits. And hopefully you're able to see how the effect is being conveyed through a very subtle focus and attention on values and those other color properties. So I think at this point now I've started my third session on the painting, and now I'm working on that middle portrait and trying to get some of the other shapes into more of a refined place. During that second session, one of the things that really helped organize the painting for me was to soften a lot of the shapes in the background of the painting. Typically for me, when I'm working indirectly like this, I'm building up the layers of the painting, I tend to have to repaint most of the image in that second session, which honestly I'm okay with, because it allows me to refine a lot of my initial thoughts of those relationships of proportion and other color properties. And because that paint then is less transparent with Gamsol, I'm using a little bit of my medium to extend the flow of the paint in the second session. But for the most part, the pigment is fairly opaque, and I'm able to get some really nice soft blends in between those shapes in the background. And some of that character is also coming into the foreground information with the portraits in the painting as well. And then, I can really start to think about where I want something to feel more rendered and a little bit more tight in terms of its representation, and areas that can be a little bit more loose and atmospheric in their edges, and then therefore have more of an abstract sort of presence. One of the things I also really like about the image that I'm working from this movie is the feeling that there's sort of this like disruption of the screen, right, or of the image itself, with these sort of like fractures that create this kind of like halo effect on top of parts of the painting. So that was a really fun challenge to try to get a sort of believable sense of shifting in light, where those lines are overlapping parts of the figure. And I'm constantly kind of moving around the painting and refining the shapes, looking at edges, always comparing those relationships of color properties. This video is just under 12 minutes long, but in total we're probably watching about 6 or so hours of painting. And it's sped up really, really intensely. So my process is really slow compared to what this video is going to be showing. So most of these observations are coming, in a very slow, intuitive process. And much like most of my other work, I typically have to respond to each new color that I'm introducing into the painting. I'm kind of in this constant state of dialogue with the painting and trying to figure out what's working well and what's not working well. And by this stage in a painting, I'm really able to start to compare more nuanced relationships of color. So, when I look at the reference, I'm really trying to find the moments of the reference that are really intense in terms of chroma, or really dark in terms of value. And I'm trying to make sure that that's coming through in the painting, because those extreme relationships of properties become the kind of extreme boundaries for the context of the rest of the painting. So typically that's kind of like this way of keying the image and the painting. It helps if you can give yourself this darkest dark, or most chromatic point of a cool color, or most chromatic warm color in the painting. And then everything else can be in reference or compared to that extreme. So that's one thing I would recommend getting to, as soon as possible, but for sure in that second session if you're working in an indirect approach like I am in the video. So this is all definitely in the third session, where I'm really trying to go through and correct a lot of smaller shapes, trying to make some of the shapes that are more saturated or pure in their color properties feel that way in the painting. I'm looking back at some of the information in the background and correcting some of the smaller sort of properties of form in those objects in the background, and really trying to think about what's really necessary to bring into the painting in terms of information that I'm seeing in the environment, to really make this feel like a complete version of this scene in the movie. I don't usually work from stills from movies, but this was a really fun reference to work from. It's one of my favorite movies. I really, really love this movie and the soundtrack and the storyline. So for one of my first like fan art paintings, this is one of my favorites. So I'm glad that this was something I got to work on for the last few days. But yeah, I mean, I think the big thing here is that I'm not using a lot of paint in the surface of the painting. I think finding the right balance of how much medium or solvent to use in with your mixtures of your oil paint takes some time to gain kind of a fluency with. But as you continue painting, you become really familiar with the tinting strength of your colors, and how much pigment and how much sort of medium you need, which brushes are going to give you what kind of a texture. So most of this painting was made with synthetic and natural hair brushes. This orange brush that I'm using here is a sable brush. It's a really fine tip round, which allows me to do really small details and really soften and blend really thin edges or boundaries between shapes really effectively. But I also used a hog hair bristle brush early on and some other flat synthetic brushes that I really like a lot too. So I hope this video is helpful to see some of my process. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're interested in more of my work, and visit my website, acunaarts.com, for more information and announcements on upcoming events like workshops and other classes. Have a nice day. Thanks.